All right, so we're back here trending in the AM. Phillies in 2023. We all talk about Trey Turner, Bryce Harper, the big names, Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola. Let's talk about some of the other guys and their importance this upcoming season. Who are going to be the unsung heroes of 2023 for the Phillies? Jim Leonhard interviewed yesterday for the Philadelphia Eagles defensive coordinator position. Vance Joseph today. We're going to talk what we want in a defensive coordinator and what qualities we want in that coordinator. Trending in the AM starts in 30 seconds.
Holding gets around in front.
And Philadelphia has it.
And a very good morning, everybody, and welcome to Trending in the AM right here on DSM Media. Make sure you give me a like, a subscribe, a follow, a share on all social media platforms. But make sure you go over to the YouTube page. It's the most important place to do it for me. Hit that subscribe button, like. It's the best place to drop your comments, thoughts, questions on today's topics or any topics you want to discuss. We'll cut short. We'll go right to your questions. We don't mind doing that as we go about it. I asked to get to 800 subscribers this week, and we gained one whole follower yesterday. Thank you, Aaron, for finally, after all these years, subscribing to the channel. But let's get to 800. Everybody tell a friend. Everybody tell somebody. Subscribe to the DSM Media YouTube page. I am Phil Stifle. We got Jason Voorhees sitting in here with me today. Good morning, Adam. How you doing this fine Tuesday morning? A little chilly. The weather, Jason. Before we get into today's topics, I looked at my weather forecast on my phone. Yesterday was 60. Today's going to be 40. Thursday's going to be 70. And then Saturday's going to be upper 30s with a chance of snow. Tell me global warming does not exist when you look at a forecast like that.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. We've actually been blessed. We haven't had a lot of snow. So
absolutely agree.
I mean, yeah. You know me. I'm with you. I'm in the move to Florida camp. So trust me. At
this rate, we won't need to move to Florida. When you're having 70-degree days in the middle of February, you know, it's kind of like you said. I just call it insane. You know, it's just insane weather right now that we're having. All right, well, but we're having this insane weather, and while this insane weather is going on, our Philadelphia Phillies, the NL defending champions, are down in Florida, Clearwater, getting set for the 2023 season, Jason. And I put out a couple poll questions on Twitter late last week. Try to come up with some topics to discuss here. We talk Trey Turner all the time. We talk Bryce Harper all the time. Zach Wheeler, Aaron, the big names. So I wanted to start looking at some of these lesser names on this team that are just as important. Last year, some of the unknown or the lower known guys had just as much of an impact on the season as any other guy did on this team. So I put together a couple poll questions. I want to run them through you. I want to have a discussion on some of these guys and who out of these guys have to have the biggest impact and will have the biggest impact this upcoming season. Because we're going to talk a lot of Phillies in the next month or two. But I thought some of these questions were pretty interesting. And I'm going to start with one specifically here. This is the third poll question, but we're going to start with it first. And we've got over 450 votes between these poll questions here. So who will have the bigger season? Who has to have the bigger season for the Phillies to be contenders in the NL again? And I put three names on the list. Alec Bohm, who dominated over 60% of the vote, Bryson Stott, or Brandon Marsh. Before I get your thoughts on it, I brought that question up as the first question of the day because yesterday the report came from camp that they're giving, I don't even know how to say Sosa's first name, Emmanuel or whatever his first name is. Edmundo Sosa. Is it Edmundo? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, Edmundo.
Edmundo Sosa is taking reps in center field. And instantly people are starting to talk about him being a platoon in center field with Brandon Marsh. And I'm instantly trying to put out there, I'm like, that's not what they're doing it for. They lack depth in center field, a backup position. To me, my answer, even though Alec Bohm is blowing away the results in this poll question, in my opinion, Brandon Marsh, out of those three names, needs to have a huge season. You traded a top prospect in Uhapi for him. He's a former top prospect in and of himself. And he's got all the potential. There were comparisons of Charlie Blackmon and stuff like that to him. He's got the potential to be a legitimate center fielder in baseball that, you put him in the 9-hole, which in nowadays is kind of like another 1-hole for baseball. I think he needs to have a really big season. And like I said, the Sosa talk, Sosa's not going to overtake Brandon Marsh in center field. I think that's kind of Phillies fans jumping the gun a little bit there. What are your thoughts on those three names, Brandon Marsh and the Sosa part of the conversation?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's a legitimate I like your question because you picked three players that, to me, are guys that are all, good young talents that need to take the next step. I mean, we saw last year, Bryson Stott get a lot more playing time, obviously, than we thought he would in his first season. He did okay. I'm not going to say that he was stellar, but he played, decent for being a rookie and being put into and thrust into that position. You look at a guy like Alec Bohm, he definitely took a next step. Obviously, I think Alec Bohm has still a lot to kind of grow. I think he has room to be even better, especially in the power department. And speaking of that, they said that he put on a lot of weight, in this offseason, and I think that's the goal. I think they're working towards trying to get him to be kind of drive the ball more. And I'm not saying necessarily hit home runs, but hit for more power. Because we all know he can hit for average. I mean, he's a guy that I realistically believe could win a batting title. He's that good.
Yeah, I want to let's get into Alec Bohm for a second here, and we'll get back to Marsh and Stott in a second. Because you say he put on a lot of weight, and I think there's a lot to prove for Alec Bohm. This is his third full season. Plus, he played. That doesn't count the short 2020 season where he was second in Rookie of the Year. This is his third full season in majors. And I think you hit it now on the head that he could be a 300 hitter. And I don't really care about the extra weight per se. My man Mitch Bernstein from the Burn with Mitch show, who's been on this show before, when I posed this question, he put it out there that he wants to see, Alec Bohm be a 30 and 100 guy. I don't think Alec Bohm's ever, even with the extra weight, going to be a 30 home run guy. I think he's going to be in more in that 20 to 22 range, but a 300 batting average. Like, I see him being, if he fully develops and reaches his capability, being like a prototypical old school 3-hole hitter where he's just going to hit 300, 320. And yeah, he might drive in some runs, but I don't think he's ever going to be a power guy. I think he's more of a doubles style hitter with the bat, the plane of his bat and the swing that he takes. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I actually agree. I don't think he will ever develop into a 30 home run guy. Like, I think he has potential, but I'm looking more. I'd rather him be a guy that hits 20 home runs, hits 35 doubles, and hits 300, because then you have another guy in your lineup that's kind of a contact hitter. Mm-hmm. That part of the problem with the Phillies lineup last year for the most of the season was that they didn't have a lot of contact hitters. I mean, Gene Segura was hurt. Bryce Harper was hurt. When they were missing those two guys, they were their two best contact hitters. The only guy you had other than them was Alec Bohm. So I think, although I agree with you, though, I do think that Alec Bohm, he was my pick on the poll for having to have the most important season, but I already believe he's going to. So I'm going to go with the guy that I mentioned in the beginning, Bryson Stott. Okay. I think, I'm interested to see how he's going to kind of, how he's going to come around as they moved him to a new position. He's now playing second base. So obviously when you brought Trey Turner in, he was your shortstop. Bryson Stott, like, he showed me a lot of grit. He's a guy that, I mean, in the playoffs, like, I look at those 2 at-bats he had. They're memorable. I mean, the one specifically, like, I believe it was in the NLCS against the Braves, where I think he like fouled off like 9 pitches, and then he got on base, and then the next, I think that was the inning that Rhys Hoskins hit that bomb where he threw the bat down. Like, there was quite a few of those at bats that I saw in the postseason, and I think Bryson Stott, like, he's a first round pick. You need him to perform. I mean, people forget that, like, he was our top prospect going into last year. And now it's almost like he's not – I'm not saying people aren't talking about him, but it's not like he's not ever mentioned as being a guy that really needs to produce. But I look at it as –
I think there's a reason for that because Alec Bohm, like I said, he's going into his fourth season, his third full season. I think he's got a lot to prove, Alec Bohm, still at this point. Brandon Marsh, we traded a top prospect for him. Center field is more kind of big picture, an important position than second base. So he's got a lot to prove. Bryson Stott, at the beginning of last year before he got demoted, he was having one of the most atrocious first-time call-up, stretches of – he was hitting like 120. I think his OPS was like 220 for a stretch last year. Then he got demoted and came back. I think there's a lack of – there's expectations on this whole team. But if Bryson Stott's your worst player of your starting 9 and he has like an okay season, it's okay because he's still young, he's still developing. I think the need and the expectations for him are a little lower. I will say he said the perfect thing. I forget what day it was. He was asked about the transition from shortstop to second base now that Trey Turner's here. And he said that I was asked by, Coach Thompson, Philly Rob about, where I'd want to play and do I mind changing positions if we bring in Trey Turner? And Bryson Stott's answer was, I just want to play baseball every day. That's it. You put me anywhere, I'll learn it. I just want to be on the field. And I think that shows a little bit of sign of maturity in such a young player in Bryson Stott. But again, the expectations, I think, or the need for the expectations to be reached aren't as high with Bryson Stott.
No, and I get that, but I guess I'm talking from as a fan that follows, and I love watching prospects and kind of looking at how they're tracking. I'm saying that we need him to be I looked at we talked about for years about other prospects in this organization. Who was that? I'm already drawing a blank. I already forgot his name. The center fielder that we drafted first overall that just never became anything.
Mickey Moniak, Cornelius
Moniak.
We drafted a whole bunch of guys in that stretch there.
Well, we had Adam Hazley, Mickey Moniak. These were all guys that were first round picks, but they all busted out. And I'm just saying that, Bryson Stott, he was a first-round pick. We need some of these first-round picks to start not busting out. Obviously, Alec Bohm was a higher pick. Alec Bohm was the 6th pick in the draft. I'm expecting a guy like that to kind of be good.
And that's my biggest question with Alec Bohm is he was, and like I said, it's not his rookie year anymore. We're now into a third 162-game season for him, his 4th season. I think this is a critical year for him to take that next step. But I think I saw enough in him that I expect him to take that next step. And that's why I'm putting more pressure on Marsh than Bohm, because we think there's potential in Marsh and Bryson Stott, but they haven't been around long enough to prove that. Alec Bohm has shown the ability to get better year after year so far, so I expect him to get better.
Brandon Marsh, I didn't touch on him, but I kind of can see where you're going with him, being the fact that he's a center fielder.
Center field's such an important position,
and it is. And I think Brandon Marsh, a lot of people around the league, were surprised that the Phillies were able to get him. And I know, there was many people in Phillies fandom that were upset that we gave up a higher, it wasn't our highest of level prospects, but it was a good prospect to get him. But to me, that's a position of value. You have not had a center fielder that you could just plug and play. Probably, I would have to go back to
Shane Victorino.
Shane Victorino in 2008. That run. Obviously there was a couple years you brought in other guys after that, but I honestly think that you need to have that center field position shored up. Brandon Marsh,
especially till Bryce Harper's able to play the field again, because you're running guys out in left field and right field that can't cover a lot of ground. You need a guy in center field that can play great defense, but you don't want center field to be a liability in your lineup.
Yeah, and to Joe's point, Marsh has to prove that he can hit lefties. Listen, that's something that you work on. Obviously, when they brought him here, they knew that he struggled. That's why last year he was platoon.
Their hitting coach Long is supposed to. He's helped a lot of guys improve against left-handed pitching. So we got to hope that question from Joe and the way you're phrasing this Brandon Marsh part is why I feel Brandon Marsh out of those three is so critical.
Well, I value Ruben Amaro Jr.'s opinion very well. I mean, I think he's
come on the show, Rube.
Extremely smart guy, and he's obviously a guy that helped this organization get to where they were during the 2008 run, that era of baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Ruben Amaro gave a raving review after the trade went down, and then I actually heard him a couple weeks ago on an interview, and he was raving again about Brandon Marsh and how he feels that he will show people that it was worth getting him and worth trading for him. So I have to hope that a guy like Ruben Amaro knows what he's talking about, and obviously Ruben's high on the guy. So if he's high on him.
Think about Bryson Stott and Brandon Marsh. Both of them have leadoff potential in their swing. They're both very young. We don't need a leadoff hitter now that we have Trey Turner, now that Rob Thompson has flat out said Trey Turner is going to be our leadoff hitter. But to have two guys, if Marsh and Stott can just take small steps forward from last year, and you're batting them in the 8 and 9 hole in your lineup, two guys that have leadoff potential hitting 8 and 9 in your lineup, I mean, that just makes your lineup so much more dangerous than it already is. So I'm not trying to take anything away from Alec Bohm. I think both Stott and Marsh are more important growth-wise than Alec Bohm, because I think even if Alec Bohm stays the same, a 280 hitter that's going to hit 20 home runs, that's not bad for Alec Bohm. You know what I mean?
Alec Bohm is further along in his progression, obviously.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you. So I'll side with you on that one.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the other question that I put in here about the offense. We'll get to the pitching next. And that's who will carry the Phillies more until Bryce Harper returns. And I didn't put Trey Turner or Kyle Schwarber. I put Nick Castellanos, who we've already talked a lot about, and Rhys Hoskins. Two guys that, Jory said Castellanos has a comeback year. We've talked already a lot about Nick Castellanos. But he and Rhys Hoskins have faced a lot of flack in this city. For whatever reasons. And that's why I specifically put those two guys. And Nick Castellanos is leading this poll so far, 55 to 45. So it's a pretty close, 241 votes, less than 10% difference between the voting on this one. So I'm just going to ask you, I'm not going to tell you who I voted for. Who has to have the bigger part of the season before Bryce Harper comes back to carry the success of this team out of those two?
Listen, I think both of them are important, but I'm going to emphatically say it has to be Castellanos. You spent $100 million on this guy. Like, the guy, listen, I gave him a pass last year. I said, you know what? A lot of times players, after they sign a contract, the year after that, the first year they struggle. I mean, we saw it happen to Alex Rodriguez years ago. I mean, you joked about that numerous times. Nick Castellanos is capable of being a superstar player. He's been that. He's did it for Detroit. He did it for the Reds. 2 years ago, he had almost an MVP season. Had the Reds been a better team, he might have been in the conversation.
Yeah.
That, to me, signifies the fact that he head and above over shoulders than Rhys Hoskins needs to perform. Not that Rhys Hoskins isn't important, but out of those two, I have to say it's Castellanos. Because, like I said, when you get signed for $100 million, like, you are expected to perform and produce. And he needs to, hopefully he corrected the wrongs in his stance and his batting, whatever was going on in his head. I think a lot of it was mental. I think that happens with baseball players. And we've talked about the fact that baseball is one of those sports where you can have like a 300 at bat slump. And then, for another month, you can tear it up for the rest of the year. And I looked at Castellanos. I went back last year after the World Series, after I was done being depressed and crying and in the doldrums. And I kind of looked at Castellanos' numbers like more in depth and try to get a picture of what happened. If you looked at Nick Castellanos last year, he was actually in a slump early in the season, but then he was coming out of it. he was actually doing really well, and it was looking like, oh my God, he's going to be Nick Castellanos last year. And then he got an injury. He injured his I believe it was his wrist. After that injury, he kind of plummeted. His average dropped. He was struggling. And then he had that long slump where he kind of just slumped for the longest period of time. And then all of a sudden, like there was like this one period in August where he started to kind of, you were thinking, oh, maybe he's coming out of it. Bang, he gets injured. And nobody really talked about the injuries because it wasn't like long-term injuries. It was like, I think that when he landed him on the 10-day LIL, he was only out for like 2 weeks. That injury, the first injury, I don't even think he ended up on the IL. But it's still an injury. And that's where I don't think sometimes reporters, like, I don't want to say they're not doing their job, but nobody really talked about that. And if you look at that, that kind of coincided exactly with when he started to slump both times. So I'm not blaming an injury, but what I am saying is Nick Castellanos is definitely capable of having that 30 home run, 300 type season. And we need that, to me, if you're going to carry this team.
The reason why I voted for Nick Castellanos over Rhys Hoskins, and people you might remember, you might not, people, but I'm a big Rhys Hoskins supporter. I am not on the trade Rhys Hoskins bandwagon unless there was, a certain type of a deal for a star. Because I always say you can't replace Rhys Hoskins' production. But the reason why Nick Castellanos has to have a better season or needs to carry the team more early in the season until Bryce is back over Rhys is because I said it all last year, and I'll say it again now. We know exactly what we are getting from Rhys Hoskins. Rhys Hoskins has never had super highs outside of that little like month and a half stretch when he first got called up. He has been consistently level. If you look at his stats at the end of every single season, it's not like Nick Castellanos has been a MVP caliber player, and then last year's like way low level type of player. Rhys Hoskins is always even Steven. He always ends up with about 30 home runs, about 85 RBIs, about 260 average, about a 320 on base. His slugging's right around 800 OPS is right around 800. I mean, he is even Steven every year. So we know what we're going to get out of Rhys Hoskins. We don't know what we're going to get out of Nick Castellanos. We need the Nick Castellanos, like everything you said, we need the Nick Castellanos that we thought we were signing. So that's why I vote for Nick Castellanos over Rhys Hoskins, because there's a wider gap between the high and the low of Nick Castellanos. We need more to the peak than the valley for Nick Castellanos. And you said about the injuries, and I talked about it last year a bunch of times, not just the injuries, the fact that he was playing left field for the first time in his career. Learning a new position for the first time, that's a big deal. And he wasn't prepared to play that position until Bryce Harper hurt his throwing shoulder. So I think he's coming into camp this year knowing that he's got to play left field right from the get-go. He'll prepare differently. He'll be more prepared in the field. It won't take away from his batting work. So Nick Castellanos, to me, much more important.
I mean, and listen, he came on in right field in the playoffs. Look at those three.
He wasn't a net negative by the end of like he might have been I don't know the analytic stats on it, but he might have been a net negative in the field at first, but by the playoffs, he was not a net negative.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, 3 of those plays saved games. And you can argue that, everyone still said, oh, well, his bat still didn't shine. I agree. Right. But he did make 3 highlight reel catches, and those won games. Mm-hmm. So, to me, he was still an important player. And obviously in the locker room, that he carries a lot of weight because you saw it in those videos where he was, like, dancing. And he was just, like, people, like, kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? They look to him. And that's why I think
he's one of those guys that kind of helps take the edge off during the stressful moments in the locker room. I don't want to say he's the goofball because he's not a goofball per se. But if things are getting tense, he kind of takes the edge off for the rest of the team. The dancing, the goofing around to an extent. Like he's just kind of that let's chill kind of guy.
I agree. And you made a lot of good points about Rhys Hoskins too, like the fact that it's almost like he's steady Eddie. Like exactly what you're getting.
Steady Eddie. I mean, he's a constant. I know he made some big errors in the playoffs, but I talked about that last year in the playoffs, things are amplified a little bit. In the regular season, you can't get there. You look around baseball. I know this is bold, and this is completely out of left field. I haven't done any research. Rhys Hoskins might be a top 10 first baseman in baseball. It's not the deep position that it used to be. There's not many first basemen hitting 30 home runs a year, driving in the runs he does, and the OPS and everything else that he does. He's
definitely a top 10.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of fans that would say that that's probably a bold, hot take.
I think he's undervalued in Philly, and I think a lot of people hate on him for the wrong reasons. A lot of people hate on Rhys Hoskins for because of his defense and because of they say that he's streaky. But like at the end of the day, Rhys Hoskins, I think the value that he provides in that locker room is second to none.
We always talk about having homegrown talent. He's been here for a long time.
He's just as important in the locker room as far as leadership as Kyle Schwarber, because
there's a dozen baseball teams. If trades were not like you weren't worried about what you're trading for who, like there's at least a dozen baseball teams that would pick up Rhys Hoskins. Just say he was randomly cut, he would be claimed off of waivers like that. All right, let's move on to the next question here. We spent a lot of time on offense. I want to talk a little pitching. And we talk about Zach Wheeler. We talk about Sir Anthony Dominguez, the big names, bringing in Craig Kimbrell, whatever. So what non-star pitcher needs to have the biggest 2023 for more continued success for the Phillies? And this one was the biggest blowout. I put 3 names on here. I put Bailey Falter, Connor Brogdon, and Ranger Suarez. Ranger Suarez got 80% of the vote. And I think that's bogus. I think it's totally bogus. I think everybody voted for Ranger Suarez just because he's the bigger name out of the 3. I want to just start out by saying that Ranger Suarez is not the key to the most success. Out of the non-stars, you could throw other names if you want to, other pitchers that aren't part of the elite, 5, bullpen arms and the elite 3 starters. No, Ranger Suarez does not become the number 2 starter. Look, Ranger Suarez is very important to this team. I'm not trying to take anything away from Ranger Suarez. But we've got 4 really good. You got Ranger Suarez. You also have Taijuan Walker, who you brought in. You still have Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler. Ranger Suarez on the importance meter, starting wise, is down at the bottom. We know we're going to get to an extent from him, but also like your 4th starter is not as important as the back end of the bull or the middle of the bullpen, or maybe that 5th starter position. Like the fact that he got 80% of the vote really is kind of odd to me, Jason.
See, I disagree with you. I have to say, first of all, Bailey Falter to me is a guy that I don't know.
I'll give you my point on him.
I will argue why he does not belong on that list, because I don't think he will be on the roster come middle of the season, because you're going to see one of those young kids up here.
Okay, I'm just going to stop you right there. See, I want Bailey Falter to have success in spring. I still to this day think that Andrew Painter, you need to slow him down a little bit. You don't want him starting April 1st on the big league roster. He's never pitched more than 100 innings in a season. He's not going to throw more than 150 this year. If you start Andrew Painter here now, by the time we get to late August, you're going to have to shut him down for the year.
I didn't say bring him here now. What I'm saying is Andrew Painter by mid-season will be up, and rightfully so.
That's why Bailey Falter needs to have success, because if he has a great spring, you could be comfortable starting Bailey Falter in that 5 spot now, so that you can be patient with Andrew Painter.
I mean,
that's why I vote for Bailey Falter.
No, and I got you, but I disagree, because I think Bailey Falter. I think there's other options even in the minors that are better, that not named Painter, that will start over. I'm not a big Bailey Falter guy.
Maybe that's because I'm pretty sure Bailey Falter had a great second half of the season last year. And I think he earned the right, to have a chance. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, outside of his bad start in the World Series, he was pitching really well last year. So, I mean, he ended up with a 4.65 ERA last year. But I bet you if you do the splits, the second half of the season, he was in the mid-3s in his starts. Once he was a regular part of the rotation.
And he bombed in the playoffs.
I'm looking at the wrong thing. He had a 3.86 ERA last year. 3.86 ERA in 16 starts. 16 starts, 3 bullpen games, 84 innings. I think a 3.86 ERA, if you get that out of your number 5 starter, you don't need Bailey Falter for till July.
He bombed in the playoffs, though.
He did, but that's more
He
because
can't. He. All right, listen. I get what you're going with it, but if you want to ask me, Ranger Suarez is more important. I could care less if he's already proved it. No, the guy is still going to be an important part. Like, if any of your number 1 or 2 guys go down, he's an important piece, and you
Absolutely.
need to see extended growth from Ranger Suarez, because as although he did throw a lot of innings last year. So my concern is that I want to make sure that he's going to be okay, because he threw a lot in the playoffs too. You started him and you used him in relief.
And that's another reason why Bailey Falter having a great spring and being a part of this roster is so important, because he threw 86 innings last year. Ranger Suarez, Aaron Nola, Zach Wheeler, all these guys threw so many innings last year. I kind of joked on a show a couple of weeks ago. I'm like, I almost want to see the Phillies institute like a Joel Embiid load management program with their starters, where in June, Aaron Nola takes 2 weeks off. In July, Zach Wheeler takes 2 weeks off, injured or not, to get these guys, ready so that by come September and October, they're not burned out and not pitching with dead arm. And having Bailey Falter pitch with the same success he did in the second half of last season, the World Series bombing that he took, or what was it, the World Series or the championship games round, whatever it was, that was more because he wasn't used from the end of the season he wasn't used in a game for like 3 weeks. And then you just threw him out there in a huge moment. And yeah, he faltered. Not to use a pun on words there. That kind of just accidentally came out there. I saw that. Like, I remember talking on this show with you or somebody that he earned the right last year to be the number 5 starter, and we all agreed. And now, because Andrew Painter's on his way up and everything else, people are forgetting how important late in the season he was to this team.
I'm telling you right now, I think Andrew Painter is going to blow everyone. I think Phillies fans are going to be like eating their crow, because they're going to say, this guy, oh my God. Like, I'm telling you, I agree. I don't want to rush the guy, but everybody, including JT Realmuto, is raving about him, saying he might be the next blue chip prospect in Major League Baseball. Like, we may have the best prospect in baseball on our hands, and I'm excited about it.
I don't think anybody is doubting the potential of Andrew Painter. My thing is, I'm just trying. He'll turn 20 before the season starts, but he is still 19 years old, and you just don't want to put a 19-year-old.
Today's day and age, this is where I think that we've become wusses, because back in the day they didn't do this, Phil. They didn't say, "Oh my God, he's 19." They brought him up. Brett Saberhagen, Dwight Gooden. How many of these guys? They just
had a lot of arm problems.
It's the new day and age of baseball that pisses me off. And I'm sorry. Now I'm pulling a mark from yesterday, because you got me fired up. I think it's a wuss mentality when we say, "Oh, the guy's only 20 years old." Like, if he's good, bring him up. He's probably better than everybody on their staff, not named Wheeler and Nola. Like, he really is. So I don't think it's
whether that's true or not. It's still the matter of case. He hasn't thrown over 100 innings. Do you really want to blow this guy's arm out and have him throw 200 innings when he's 19, 20 years old?
I mean, listen, we can argue this.
I tried to find a 19-year-old that got called up, at 19, and I couldn't find a 19-year-old in recent memory. But you had Kerry Wood, you had Steven Strasburg, you had David Price.
Strasburg.
What?
Recent. Strasburg was
he got called up at like 22 or 23 is what I found. So nobody was 19 when they got called up. But all these guys, Kerry Wood, Strasburg, Price, they all had really good careers, but they all had a lot of arm trouble too. And it could be because of,
I think, a lot of play. And I get that, but a lot of guys that aren't called up, early enough have arm problems. I mean, Sir Anthony Dominguez, he had arm problems. Like, listen, arm problems are a thing of the game now. Like, if you're going to worry about that, then just get a dog, because, like I said, I think if you have somebody that's a legit
mark line. That's a mark line.
If you have somebody that's a legit prospect, then it's okay to be okay with that, and not be fearful that every time that somebody's going to come up, they're going to blow his arm. They don't have to bring him up and throw him 9 innings a game. They could bring him up and throw him 5 innings a game. But I'm not saying bring him up today. But what I am saying is, if he's that good and he's dominating in AAA, he will be on this roster, and because he gives the team a chance to win.
And I agree. This is just why I'm saying that Bailey Falter is important, because you don't have to rush that decision.
I got it.
Pitching well.
Maybe you finally got through.
I'm just trying to say that Falter, he's, instead of having like,
he's not going to falter.
Right, he's not going to falter. Phillies in the past, you always need that sixth starter, because there's going to be injuries in baseball. There's going to be tired arms, whatnot. But we always call up these guys that are, I call them the quadruple A pitchers. Guys that are good in AAA but not good enough in the minors. If Bailey Falter could be a major league quality pitcher versus a quadruple A pitcher, that's a bonus for this team. And it helps all these other things we've just talked about. It kind of solves all those issues by having a quality Bailey Falter. And that's all I'm looking at. I don't expect Bailey Falter to keep, to block Andrew Painter's path to the majors. I just expect it to be a way to slow it down to an extent. I fully want and expect Andrew Painter to be elite and pitching come playoff time, or the playoff chase at the end of the season in the Phillies, rotation. But you only do that if you just wait on him. Because again, 100 innings, the max they're going to let him go is 150 this year. Well, 150 innings, that gets used up really quick. So that's all. I want to touch on the other name in this poll that got no love.
Brogdon.
Connor Brogdon. You talk about what we didn't see out of Falter in the playoffs for whatever reason. I saw a lot out of Connor Brogdon in the playoffs. He looked damn good. He looked like he was starting to find his groove a little bit in the playoffs. And we've got this super elite built back end of our bullpen. Sir Anthony Dominguez, Jose Alvarado, Craig Kimbrell, Gregory Soto. These four guys that are uber elite. But Connor Brogdon is right on the cusp of being joined in there. And for as elite as this back end of the bullpen is, there are question marks on every single one of those four. You got Dominguez's shoulder. Will it hold up? I hope so. Alvarado's been hot and cold in his career. So has Soto. Craig Kimbrell, we've talked about him this week already, that maybe he resorts back to his old form, but maybe he's just washed. So Connor Brogdon is that guy that at first he's going to be that fifth inning, sixth inning guy. But if any of those other guys fall or struggle or get hurt, he's more than capable, I think, to fill in those late inning roles. In fact, honestly, and I know this is crazy, he might be better than some of those guys at this point. He might prove that he's better than those guys. So I think Connor Brogdon is poised to have a really big season for the Phillies in the bullpen.
It's funny that you say that, because last year, before I observed that Dominguez would be back and healthy, I thought of Brogdon as being a guy that could be a closer.
He has that closer mentality.
He has lights out stuff. And honestly, I agree with you. I think he is still super important for this team, moving forward, part of their future. And this year, obviously, whatever he can give you is a bonus, because at the end of the day, you're still going to have guys that throw in the middle innings, because your starters aren't going to always go 6 and 7 innings, especially early in the season. We talked about that, about how, the Phillies burned out their starters so early last year, and it showed in the playoffs. You're going to have games where you're going to need middle innings guys. And if you have all of these back end guys, who's going to be your middle inning guy? Connor Brogdon could be that guy, because he can throw 2 innings. He has that kind of,
I mean, before we made the Soto trade and signed Kimbrell, in my mind, Connor Brogdon was the 7th inning guy in this bullpen. He was one of the 3 guys that was going to compete for the rotation of saves, and who was going to pitch the 6th, the 7th, 8th, 9th, based off of, Rob Thompson's, unique way of managing high leverage situations. Connor Brogdon was part of that conversation, in my opinion, before you bring in Soto, before you bring in Kimbrell. So if he was part of that conversation, and then you bring in more guys, he kind of gets bumped down. But if one of those guys falters, not to keep using that word, he's that guy that could step up, and I think he's proven that he's more than capable of it.
I agree with you, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think Connor Brogdon, I know he didn't get the love, and he wasn't going to get the love in the poll, but I wanted to put his name in the poll just so that he got a little bit of love. You know what I mean? Because I think he deserves it. Because he was lights out in the bullpen or in the playoffs last year.
Yeah, it is going to be nasty to see this bullpen and how it gets used.
Yeah. You say that, and I'm thinking about how many injuries we've had in this bullpen over the last couple of years. And no matter who we bring in, it seems like we're always struggling with injuries in the bullpen. Well, you've got so much depth in this bullpen that if even two guys get hurt, you're not scrambling.
You can do 7th, 8th, and 9th, literally left, right, left, or vice versa. You could do right, left, left, depending on lineups. Like, Rob's going to have a lot of flexibility, and I wouldn't be surprised if they don't have a set closer. I know you and I know we like that because we like when they have a defined role. Yes. But there may not be a defined role because when you have this good of a back end, it might change game to game. And I'm okay with it if it works. Where I get frustrated.
We'll see if it works in a 162 game season.
And that's what I mean. Yeah, because sometimes that can have a negative effect when guys don't know their roles.
See, you can have set roles. You can have a set role where Dominguez is your closer, but if he pitches 2 days in a row, well, then the third day off, you're not scrambling. Like in the past, like if you have a closer and they've gone too many days in a row, well, who's going to be your closer in that next big moment? Well, you've got 4 other guys that can fill in that spot. So the depth is there. It's just a matter of keeping these guys healthy and pitching well.
Yeah, I'd like to see how Alvarado bounces back after having given up that home run because that mentally
that's a tough one. Let's switch the script here. I can't believe we went 41 minutes there on this. I didn't think it was going to take that long to cover those 3 poll questions. But look, Phillies Spring Training, it's a long thing. So we're going to get into it more tomorrow and the next day and the next day as news comes out of spring training and camp and whatnot. We barely talked about the Sosa, being a center fielder, aspect of it. But I want to talk a little Eagles because obviously, we're still at a search for defensive coordinator, unofficially still for offense coordinator, but I feel like that's pretty much set in stone that it's going to be Brian Johnson as the offensive coordinator. So yesterday, we've heard a lot of names. Vic Fangio, but he went to Miami. Vance Joseph, who's coming in for an interview today. We've heard a lot of names. Rollis, who ended up going to Arizona. The defensive backs coach, who I can't think of his name right now, is in line. There's a lot of names in line that the Eagles are looking at for defensive coordinator. A new name popped up yesterday. He was interviewed yesterday, and that's Jim Leonhard, former NFL safety, Wisconsin Badgers defensive coordinator / he was an interim coach for a little while there in Wisconsin. And people really, honestly, I forgot who Jim Leonhard was. I don't watch a lot of college football. Once I realized who he was safety-wise, 10-year vet, I remembered him a little bit as a player, high IQ type player. I really, people were jumping up and down when he came in and thought that he should have been hired on the spot. So it got me thinking, Jason, not who you want as a defensive coordinator, but what you want in a defensive coordinator. Because this team has been built a certain way. In Jonathan Gannon, Nick Sirianni's eyes of what they wanted their defense to be. Do you want a coordinator that could come in and just tweak what we've been doing for the last couple years? Or do you want a guy, because, Brian Dawkins spoke out yesterday about how he did not like Nick Sirianni's style. And if he was a player, he would have not Nick Sirianni, Jonathan Gannon, that he would have hated playing under Nick Sirianni. Do you just come in and bring in a guy that is going to change the script on what you've been doing for 2 years because that's the style of defense they run? And do you want the Eagles changing their defensive philosophies as drastically as some of these guys? Vance Joseph, if he's the guy, is going to drastically change the style of defense that we run here, which you got to change the personnel.
That concerns me.
Which part of it?
Both. The fact that I don't want a defensive coordinator to come in here and just change the entire defense because we've been through that. Are you talking like philosophies like 3-4, 4-3, and that kind of stuff? Because
absolutely.
Well, that's
press
crazy.
Coverage, man coverage, zone coverage. Everybody wants blitzing more often. Well,
okay.
Then that puts your cornerbacks on an island, and if you don't have the great cornerbacks, there's so much. All right, let's just talk about Jim Leonhard for a second. If Jim Leonhard comes here, his base style is a 3-4, which we ran a 4. We didn't really want to run a 3-4 or a 4-3. We ran a 5-2 most of this season. We had the 3 down guys. You had Reddick and whoever else on the edge. You had 5 guys up front. One would drop back in coverage. You only ran 2 linebackers on the field because even though he's listed as a linebacker, Hassan Reddick's not a linebacker. You really only ran 2 linebackers at a time. He runs a 3-4, but he's also run a lot of 2-4-5. 2 defensive tackles, 4 linebackers / edge rushers, and 5 defensive backs. That's kind of his thing, which kind of fits to the Eagles. But in theory, he's a 3-4 guy, which we're a 4-3 team in theory. He also puts his cornerbacks on an island. He blitzes, and he likes man coverage. Completely different than what this team's done. And we're going to lose Bradbury, but Slay will probably be here. Maddox is going to be here. Most likely Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's going to be here. Marcus Epps or somebody else is going to be here. Do you want somebody like Jim Leonhard that's going to completely flip the script on what's been done here?
So I guess if you're asking me what I want in my defensive coordinator, I don't really give a rat's ass if we blitz, if we don't blitz, if we play man coverage.
I love that answer.
Coverage. If we play, high safety, I don't care about any of that. What I want is a defense that doesn't get picked apart by the dink and dunk. Because I think if you look at quarterbacks like Pat Mahomes, these superstar quarterbacks, yes, they can air it out. They could throw the deep balls. But at the end of the day, they win most of their games by dinking and dunking and putting 70 to 80% completion percentage up there. Well, if you look at this Eagles defense the last 2 seasons, I came around on Gannon, and I admitted that I was wrong about him because you cannot have a defense that is second in the NFL or third in the NFL, first against the pass, almost sets a sack record, and say that your defensive coordinator sucked. You can't. You can't do it. I don't care how he performed in the Super Bowl because, listen, at the end of the day, the players didn't make plays. You could say all you want about Jonathan Gannon, but we didn't have Hassan Reddick get 1 sack. And I love Hassan Reddick, but I'm going to call him out when your bread and butter is the sack and you don't even get to the quarterback. Now, I know people were bitching about the field and he slipped in his. I don't care about that. All I care about is I don't want to see another game where quarterbacks pick us apart, dinking and dunking, and have an 80% completion percentage. So I could care less. That's what I want. So if Jim Leonhard's that guy, sign me up.
I love how you say, I don't give a rat's ass. I'm like, that's it. Show's over, I mean, I think that sums it up. So here's the thing. Like, what you're saying. So Vance Joseph, and I kind of touched on this yesterday, and then we kind of went in a different direction. Vance Joseph last year, I think it was either the 2nd or 3rd highest blitz percentage in the league, his defense. But yet his pass defense was like 24th in the league. His run defense was like 25th in the league. So, yeah, he blitzed a lot, but the rest of his schemes were so bad. Now, it could be talent, like he didn't have the cornerbacks, whatever it may be. But just blitzing a lot, I think too many people are hung up on, and a lot of them aren't even old enough to remember him. Everybody's hung up on Jim Johnson, who's been gone for a long time. One of the greatest defensive coordinators of all time in football. People are too hung up on him. And that's not the way the new NFL is run. Now, Jim Leonhard, I don't know much about him other than what I've read about his coaching career at Wisconsin. Wisconsin's always got a very gritty, tough defense. They're Big East, Big Ten team, hard-nosed, smash-mouth, university. That's kind of like they run the football a lot and they play tough defense. But when he was an NFL player, he also had a very high IQ. He wasn't the fastest or the hardest hitter he wasn't an all-pro safety, but he survived by being smarter than everybody else on the field. And that's what I want. And the difference between, to me, Vance Joseph, who's coming in today, and Jim Leonhard, who was in here yesterday, is the IQ level. Jim Leonhard might be more willing to adapt and adjust to his personnel than Vance Joseph, who's been running the same style nonstop. Jim Leonhard has adjusted every year at Wisconsin, whether he's 3-4, 2-5, whatever he does, he adjusts to the personnel. And that's what this Eagles success has been. The first day that Nick Sirianni was brought here. He said in that press conference, I'm not putting square pegs in round holes. I'm going to adjust to what I've got. I think Jim Leonhard, that's what I want in a defense coordinator. I want somebody that's willing to be open-minded and adjust to the personnel that he has. And I don't want somebody that's just a dead set one way or another coordinator. I want somebody that's going to be open-minded, that's going to look at each week and the matchups and adjust.
So
that's the thing we always talked about Jonathan Gannon. He never adjusted in-game, which he actually did better than people realize. But I want guys that are going to adjust to the personnel on the field.
So what you're telling me is you want the anti-Jim Schwartz.
Oh, absolutely. But see, the thing is with Jim Schwartz, he gave up 5,000 yards in the Super Bowl, but we won. So, it's all good. And Jim Schwartz was that veteran voice in the coaching room to young Doug Peterson. So Jim Leonhard versus Vance Joseph, there's an argument to be made for Vance Joseph because he's been a head coach.
Can I ask you a question? What do you think Eagles fans' biggest complaint about Jonathan Gannon is? Like, what is the main reason why people don't like Jonathan Gannon?
Because they say he doesn't blitz enough, that he doesn't send the house. But what's the point of that when you're still leading the league in sacks the way they do? Like, you don't need to send 70% all-out blitzes when your front four is getting after the quarterback anyway.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Didn't we blitz on the 2 touchdowns where they scored?
I believe we did, yes.
Okay, so that we blitzed and it didn't work. And fans still are pissed. So then they're going to say, well, why did you blitz? And it's like almost like, I just think people weren't going to like Jonathan Gannon regardless. That's just how I feel. Because
I really believe it's a visual aesthetic. Everybody wants to eliminate the tush push because it's not aesthetically pleasing to the NFL's eye. To a fan, to an Eagles fan, especially the older fans that grew up during the Buddy Ryan or Jim Johnson era, what they want is smash mouth blitz football. And if they don't see it, they just think it's a bad defense. As opposed to, it's a new NFL. You can't just do certain things that you used to do in the NFL.
But look at the numbers and the results
anymore. You can't try to knock guys out of games anymore.
But the numbers and the analytics and all the results that they speak the opposite to that. They show that Jonathan Gannon was good and it did improve the team. And if Jonathan Gannon was such an issue, why did the Eagles offer him more money to be a defensive coordinator instead of going to be a coach somewhere? I mean, he would have made more money.
I think that's a huge piece that's not getting talked about at all, is the simple fact that new report came out that the Eagles wanted him to stay in Philly so bad, they offered him more money than what the Cardinals offered him. But more power to Jonathan Gannon. I mean, Jonathan Gannon wants to be a head coach. He didn't give a crap what organization it was. The train wreck that Arizona is with Kyler Murray right now. He's like, I'm getting a chance to be a head coach. I'm taking it.
No, and I don't blame him, but I'm saying if the Eagles were willing to go that level, then Eagles obviously believe Jonathan Gannon is great.
Absolutely.
And that goes against what the fans think, because that shows me that they don't care. They care what the fans think, but they don't care when it comes to knowing what's going on and knowing football, because they would have made that offer. And I think a lot of fans are going to be disappointed regardless, because when we bring in another coordinator, I'm not so sure our defense is going to put up the same level of play next year. I'm not.
Well, I mean, there's 2 reasons for that. No matter who the defensive coordinator is, the defense versus the offense, there's a lot more free agents and holes to fill on defense than offense. Offense, the core of the offense, outside of running back, is going to remain the same. You might lose Kelsey, but you have the replacement already in place. On defense, you're potentially losing 1 or 2 safeties. You're losing 1 of your cornerbacks. Your 2 starting linebackers are free agents. Your 2 starting defensive tackles are free agents. There's a lot of holes to be filled, to be brought back, to be traded, to draft. There's a lot of holes on the defense. So no matter who the defensive coordinator is, there's going to be a lot of turnover. And when there's that much turnover, and on top of all that, we're facing a really tough schedule. I think we are ranked as the toughest schedule going to the start of the 2023 season in the NFL. So the defense is going to have issues, hiccups going into 2023. So, yeah, the Eagles fans are going to be disappointed no matter who it is.
I guess I just say be careful what you wish for. Because everyone wanted Jonathan Gannon out of here. But, like,
everyone wanted
Jonathan Gannon the main reason why the Eagles lost the Super Bowl. I'm still can't wrap my finger around that.
It's funny because everybody wanted Schwartz out of here, but we actually won a Super Bowl with him. And Jonathan Gannon, everybody wanted out of here, but he ran a top-tier defense. He just came up small in the big moment.
But do you think that he's the number one reason they lost the Super Bowl?
I'm over the Super Bowl. I mean, he's part of the reason, but not all of the reason. There's a lot of reasons to go around why we lost the Super Bowl. But at this point, he's not the bottom. He's not the top reason we lost the Super Bowl.
That's what I asked.
He's just part of the puzzle on why we lost. So, yeah, I get what you're saying. And I love that you brought up the contract thing that the Eagles wanted him back. But he's gone. And, again, more videos yesterday coming out on Twitter of him and how he awkwardly is greeting every single Cardinals player. The one guy came up to him and he didn't even know who his one player was. He's like, oh, yeah, nice to meet you. You know what I mean? Like, no clue who you are, kid. But you're on my team. He just looks like an awkward person. But the next guy, I think the IQ. I think in this day and age, the IQ is more important than the scheme. And I think Jim Leonhard has that IQ. And I'll end on this with this point. You bring in Jim Leonhard. What do you want in your next defensive coordinator? Do you want somebody that's going to be here for the next 2 or 3 years? Because like we just said, there's going to be a lot of turnover in this defense, which means reshaping this defense. And it's not going to be just a one-year project. Do you want a guy that's going to be here the next 2 or 3 years as the defensive coordinator? Or do you want a guy that's potentially going to be poached right away? Jim Leonhard, he's a fast-rising coach. He is going to be a head coach in college or the NFL sooner than later. You bring him in as your defensive coordinator this year, he might be the best option for 2023, but then that also leaves open the door that in 2024, you're probably looking for another defensive coordinator again. So that's another thing that worries me about Jim Leonhard. Vance Joseph has to rebuild his image if he's ever going to be a head coach again. He might just be one of those guys that is defensive coordinator for the rest of his career. He might not be another head coach again. He might be here for 2 or 3 more years at a minimum. Jim Leonhard, I mean, there's already talk that he might be the guy, the front runner to take over in Alabama whenever Nick Saban retires. So, there's already talk of where Jim Leonhard's going to be a head coach. So, do you want an NFL defensive coordinator that's going to be here for 1 year? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I like I said, it doesn't matter to me who we get. I just want a guy that has this defense able to make plays and not, give up, glaring plays like they did in the Super Bowl. Because that's just it's ingrained in my mind now, Yeah.
All right. We're going to wrap up Trending the AM right there. I'm sure we'll see what we talk about tomorrow because there's going to be more of this conversation. There's going to be more news of Vance Joseph. I honestly think that this defense coordinator position will be filled. I think Vance Joseph is their last main guy they want to interview. I think within the next 24 to 36 hours, we know who the guy is, whether it's from within, Joseph, Leonhard, whoever it may be. I think the interview process is going to wrap up pretty soon here. So we'll have that to discuss. We'll have lots more to talk about all week long right here on Training the AM. I am Phil Stiefel. This is Jason Voorhees. Make sure you go back, you like, you subscribe, notifications on. Drop your comments on replay. I go back and I check them all. I greatly appreciate it. Back tomorrow, 8:30 a.m. Hey, everybody have a great, great Tuesday. I'll be back tonight, Fairway to Heaven, 9 p.m. The Model Maniac will be joining me on Fairway to Heaven. Everybody have a great Tuesday, and we'll talk tomorrow.
And Philadelphia has it.
Holding gets around in front.